Today, we're about to explore 5 times families were eaten alive by deadly animals, from a saltwater crocodile ambush in Papua New Guinea to a grizzly bear mauling in the Alaskan wilderness. But first, we begin along the Sepik River, where one family's fishing expedition turns into a nightmare of scales and teeth. It was June 19, 2015, and the dry season had reduced the Sepik River's tributaries to their lowest levels in years, concentrating wildlife along shrinking waterways throughout Papua New Guinea's remote interior. In the small riverine village of Yenchin, approximately 40 miles from the nearest maintained road, subsistence fishing remained the primary protein source for families who had lived along these channels for generations. Tavua Kambri was a 42-year-old fisherman whose knowledge of the river's seasonal patterns had sustained his extended family through decades of economic hardship. His wife, Miriam, 38, frequently accompanied him on night fishing expeditions, as did their oldest son, Kewa, 19, who was learning the traditional methods that had supported their village since before colonial contact. The family owned a 14-foot dugout canoe carved from a single log, narrow and unstable but adequate for navigating the shallow channels where fish concentrated during the dry months. The evening departure was routine. The family pushed off from the village landing shortly after sunset, paddling upstream toward fishing grounds approximately 3 miles distant. The night was moonless, visibility reduced to the faint glow of a handheld lamp that Tavua used to navigate known obstacles. Other village fishermen had reported excellent catches over the previous week, though several had also noted increased crocodile activity in the deeper pools where the receding water forced the massive reptiles into closer proximity with human activity. The family reached the fishing grounds at approximately 9:30 p.m., maneuvering the canoe into position near a submerged log where catfish were known to gather. Miriam prepared the nets while Tavua positioned the vessel. Kewa maintained balance in the narrow craft, his weight distributed carefully to prevent capsizing in water that remained over 15 feet deep despite the seasonal drought. Saltwater crocodiles are the largest living reptiles on Earth, with mature males in Papua New Guinea's river systems commonly exceeding 16 feet in length and weighing over 1,000 pounds. These apex predators possess among the most powerful bite forces measured in any living animal, generating pressures exceeding 3,700 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone and shear through flesh with devastating efficiency. Their hunting strategy relies on remaining completely motionless below the surface, often for over an hour, before launching vertically with explosive acceleration. Once prey is secured, crocodiles execute a death roll, spinning violently to disorient victims before dragging them beneath the surface to drown. Multiple independent crocodiles may be drawn to the same disturbance, responding opportunistically to splashing and signs of struggle. After drowning prey, crocodiles typically cache remains underwater, wedging carcasses beneath submerged logs or roots to soften tissue before consumption. The canoe capsized without warning. Investigators believed the canoe was likely struck from below, the impact of a massive crocodile rising from the depths sufficient to overturn the lightweight vessel and dump all 3 occupants into the dark water. Other fishermen within earshot heard splashing and a brief cry before Tavua disappeared beneath the surface. The sound carried across the still water to nearby fishermen, alerting them that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Miriam surfaced, screaming for help as she attempted to reach the overturned canoe. Witnesses heard her cries intensify before being cut short. The splashing grew more violent, then ceased entirely. Kewa's voice was never heard. The evidence would later suggest that a second crocodile, drawn by the disturbance, had seized him during the initial chaos. A rescue canoe reached the site within 20 minutes, but the dark water revealed nothing. The overturned canoe drifted slowly downstream, empty. The search continued through the night, expanding at first light to cover several miles of river channel in both directions. Miriam's partial remains were recovered 2 days later, approximately half a mile downstream from the attack site. Her lower body was missing, consistent with crocodile feeding behavior. Tavua's body was never found. On the 4th day of the search, wildlife authorities from the provincial capital arrived with authorization to destroy large crocodiles in the immediate area. 2 massive saltwater crocodiles, measuring 16 and 14 feet respectively, were shot within a mile of the attack location. Partially digested bone fragments and clothing hardware consistent with Kewa were recovered from the stomach contents of the larger animal. The remains were confirmed as those of Kewa Kambri. The investigation determined that the family had been fishing in an area known for large crocodile concentrations during the dry season, when large males concentrate in deeper pools that also attract fishing activity. No violations were found, and the deaths were classified as a tragic wildlife encounter in an ecosystem where humans and apex predators shared limited space. While the Sepik River had claimed 3 lives in minutes, the forest roads of northern India would soon prove equally merciless for siblings traveling home through tiger country at the worst possible hour. It was March 8, 2016. And the late afternoon sun filtered through the sal forests of Uttarakhand as 3 siblings completed their purchases at the regional market in Ramnagar. Devrath Chaudhary, 34, operated a small general store in the village of Dela, located approximately 5 kilometers from the market via a maintained road that wound through cultivated land. The direct route home, however, followed an older forest track that cut the distance nearly in half, passing through dense woodland that formed a buffer zone adjacent to Corbett Tiger Reserve. Devrath's sister, Priyasha, 29, taught at the village primary school. Their youngest brother, Anik, 23, worked in construction when projects were available. The 3 had traveled to market together, carrying supplies too heavy for one person to manage alone. The late departure from the market, delayed by a shopkeeper's pricing dispute, meant they would not reach home before dusk if they took the longer road. After brief discussion, they decided on the forest shortcut, a decision they had made dozens of times previously without incident. The forest track narrowed considerably once it left the cultivated areas, hemmed in by thick undergrowth and overhanging branches that reduced visibility to less than 30 feet in most sections. The 3 walked closely together, Devrath leading with the heaviest load, Anik bringing up the rear. They entered the forest corridor at approximately 4:30 p.m., expecting to emerge near their village within 45 minutes. Bengal tigers are among Asia's most powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 570 pounds and capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. Tigers are ambush hunters, relying on cover and patience to approach within striking range before launching explosive attacks that can cover 15 feet in a single bound. Elderly or injured tigers occasionally become man-eaters when dental damage prevents them from taking traditional prey. Worn or broken canines, common in aged males, make it difficult to achieve the crushing throat bite that tigers use to suffocate large prey efficiently. These individuals may target humans as slower, easier alternatives to deer or wild boar. After a kill, tigers drag prey to dense cover before feeding extensively, often consuming 20 to 40 pounds of meat before caching the remainder. Tigers typically remain near cached kills, defending them against scavengers and returning to feed over multiple days. The attack occurred at approximately 4:45 p.m., less than 2 kilometers into the forest section. The tiger struck from dense roadside vegetation, its tawny coat providing perfect camouflage in the dappled shadows. Devrath had no time to react before 400 pounds of muscle and claw drove him off the path and into the undergrowth. His scream was cut short. Priyasha and Anik turned to see their brother disappearing into the forest, drag marks visible in the soft earth. Anik attempted to follow, shouting for help, but stopped after 10 paces when he heard the deep, rumbling growl that signaled the tiger was still present and defending its kill. He grabbed Priyasha, and they fled down the forest track. In the darkness and panic, the 2 became separated. Priyasha continued toward the main road and eventually reached other travelers, raising the alarm. Anik, disoriented by the dense undergrowth and unable to find a clear route to the village, circled back toward the forest track unintentionally. By then, full darkness had fallen. No one would enter the forest until morning. The search party that departed at first light discovered evidence of the attack within minutes. Drag marks led 80 yards into dense forest where the tiger had cached Devrath's body. Evidence indicated the tiger had fed extensively at the site before resuming movement. Signs suggested intermittent feeding and short movements within the immediate area. Anik's body was discovered at approximately 9:30 a.m., less than half a kilometer from the initial attack site. He had taken shelter in a shallow roadside ditch, where evidence suggested the tiger encountered him during nighttime movement within its territory. The killing had been efficient. His remains had been partially cached beneath fallen branches nearby. The Forest Department launched an intensive tracking operation using camera traps, pugmark analysis, and experienced hunters. Over 6 days, they documented a large male tiger moving through a defined territory that included the attack site. On the 7th day, an authorized hunter successfully destroyed the animal approximately 3 miles from where Devrath had been killed. The tiger was elderly, its canines severely worn, and several teeth broken, consistent with documented patterns of man-eating tigers in the region. Human remains were recovered from the primary kill site and an adjacent secondary feeding location. The investigation concluded that an aged male tiger, unable to hunt traditional prey effectively, had opportunistically killed 2 of the 3 siblings after killing its first victim and encountering the second within the same territory. Priyasha Chaudhary, the sole survivor, provided critical testimony that guided the tracking operation. The siblings had entered known tiger habitat during high-risk hours with inadequate precautions. While an Indian forest had witnessed a tiger's methodical hunting across 12 hours, the remote homesteads of Mozambique would soon face an even more direct invasion when drought drove a lion pride into human territory with devastating results. It was July 22, 2014. And the prolonged dry season had transformed Niassa province's landscape into a harsh expanse of yellowed grass and skeletal trees. Wildlife populations had contracted toward permanent water sources, leaving vast stretches of wilderness depleted of traditional prey species. In the remote homestead of Felisberto Makwakwa, located nearly 20 miles from the nearest town, the changing conditions had manifested in increasingly bold nighttime visits from predators, testing the weak barriers between wilderness and human habitation. Felisberto, 47, had farmed the same plot of land for over 2 decades, supporting his family through a combination of subsistence agriculture and small-scale livestock production. His wife, Zulmira, 44, managed the household's daily operations while their 2 adult children, both in their early 20s, assisted with farm work and herding. The family's modest dwelling consisted of mud brick walls with a thatched roof, typical of rural construction throughout the region. A separate enclosure housed goats and chickens, though the barrier was constructed of little more than thorn branches and worn wire. The previous week had delivered a clear warning. 3 goats had been killed in a nighttime raid that left massive paw prints around the enclosure. Felisberto had reinforced the livestock barrier, but the family dwelling itself remained protected by only a wooden door secured with a rope latch. Neighbors advised evacuating to town until the predators moved on, but Felisberto feared abandoning his livestock and crops to raiders, both animal and human. The family chose to remain. African lions are among the continent's most adaptable predators, with prides adjusting hunting strategies based on available prey and environmental conditions. Adult females weigh between 260 and 400 pounds, with males reaching up to 550 pounds. During severe droughts, when wild prey becomes scarce, lions increasingly target livestock and, in rare cases, humans. Prides that successfully take human prey may develop patterns of returning to the same locations, having learned that human settlements offer vulnerable targets. When entering structures, multiple lions may follow the first through the breach opportunistically, while others remain outside due to space limitations, rather than deliberate positioning. Lions prefer to drag prey into open spaces before feeding, as their social structure involves multiple animals feeding simultaneously. Their powerful jaws deliver a suffocating bite to the throat or muzzle, and when attacking in confined spaces, lions use their weight and claws to immobilize prey before delivering the same suffocating throat bite once the victim is subdued. The attack began shortly before midnight. Felisberto's adult son would later report hearing scratching sounds near the walls, followed by the sound of the door giving way and weakened wall sections collapsing as multiple lions forced entry through the dwelling's weakest points. In the chaos and darkness, specific details dissolved into fragmented horror. Felisberto was attacked first, his position nearest the breached wall making him the initial target. Evidence suggested multiple lions entered the dwelling while others remained outside. The lions dragged Felisberto through the opening they had created, pulling him into the clearing approximately 40 yards from the homestead where the rest of the pride waited. Evidence suggested feeding began immediately in the open space, consistent with pride feeding behavior. Zulmira was attacked while attempting to intervene, her body found partially inside the dwelling and partially outside, indicating she had been pulled through the doorway during the struggle. The family's adult son sustained severe lacerations while attempting to defend his parents with a farming implement, but survived by climbing into the thatched roof space where the lions could not follow. His younger sister fled through a rear opening and ran to the nearest neighboring homestead, approximately 2 kilometers distant. Neighboring families responded with torches and noise, driving the pride away from the immediate area shortly before dawn. Authorities arrived the following afternoon, documenting the scene and confirming that both Felisberto and Zulmira had died from massive trauma consistent with lion attacks. The feeding site 40 yards from the dwelling showed clear evidence of prolonged consumption by multiple animals. A tracking operation spanning 9 days followed lion movements through the surrounding bush. Authorities identified a pride of 6 individuals, with pug marks confirming lion presence at the attack site and surrounding area. 4 lions were destroyed for public safety, 2 adult females, 1 adult male, and 1 subadult. The animals were targeted based on repeated presence at the attack site and proximity to the documented feeding area. Human remains and personal effects were recovered during the site examination, though most of both victims had been consumed. The investigation concluded that extreme drought conditions had pushed the pride into human-inhabited areas in search of food. and that the weak construction of the dwelling had allowed entry, after which the lions encountered sleeping occupants. The surviving family members relocated to town following the incident. While Mozambique's drought had delivered predators directly into human homes, the remote wilderness of Alaska would soon demonstrate that even experienced backcountry travelers faced mortal danger when camping in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was August 14th, 2017, and the late summer landscape of Alaska's interior mountains had reached its final weeks before the first serious snowfall would drive remaining hikers out of the high country. For the Tenbrook family, the annual backpacking expedition represented a cherished tradition spanning over 15 years of wilderness exploration. Wyatt Tenbrook, 52, had built a successful construction business in Anchorage, but his passion remained the wild country where grizzlies ruled the salmon streams and human presence was temporary at best. His wife, Shailene, 50, shared his enthusiasm for extended wilderness travel, having accompanied him on expeditions throughout Alaska and Western Canada. Their adult son, accompanying them on this trip, had logged hundreds of miles in the backcountry and considered himself competent in bear country protocols. The family carried bear-resistant food containers, had completed multiple wilderness safety courses, and typically exercised caution when selecting camp locations. The chosen campsite, however, represented a critical error in judgment. The family established their tents in a meadow approximately 100 yards from a major salmon stream, selecting the location based on scenic value and apparent isolation rather than wildlife corridor analysis. August marked the peak of hyperphagia, the period when grizzly bears desperately consume massive quantities of food to prepare for winter hibernation. During this window, bears may feed for most of the day, their behavior driven by biological imperatives that override normal caution around humans. Previous hikers in the area had reported a bold bear that approached camps without typical wariness, behavior that suggested either habituation to human food sources or a predatory individual that had lost fear of humans entirely. The Tenbrook family had received no specific warning about this animal, though general bear activity alerts had been posted at the trailhead where they began their expedition 3 days earlier. Grizzly bears are North America's most powerful terrestrial predators, with adult males in Alaska's interior commonly exceeding 800 pounds and standing 7 feet tall when upright. Despite their massive bulk, grizzlies can sprint at speeds approaching 35 miles per hour over short distances, faster than any human can react. Most grizzly attacks are defensive, triggered when bears are surprised at close range or protecting cubs. However, rare predatory attacks do occur, typically involving food-conditioned or habituated bears that have learned to associate humans with accessible calories. Predatory bear attacks differ fundamentally from defensive encounters. Bears attacking defensively typically strike, assess whether the threat has been neutralized, and disengage. Predatory bears approach silently, target the head and neck with initial bites, and begin feeding once prey is incapacitated. Forensic evidence of predatory behavior includes consumption patterns focused on high-calorie areas, such as thighs and abdomen, with minimal defensive swipe wounds, indicating the victim had little opportunity to fight back. The attack occurred at approximately 11:30 p.m. The family had retired to their tents 3 hours earlier, food stored in bear-resistant containers positioned 50 yards from the sleeping area. Investigators would later note that the containers showed no signs of tampering, and no food attractants were found at the campsite itself, suggesting no evidence that food conditioning directly triggered the attack. The adult son would later report hearing fabric tearing, followed immediately by his father's screams. Before he could exit his own tent, the screaming had stopped. Wyatt had been attacked inside his tent by a large male grizzly that had approached with complete silence. Forensic evidence later confirmed that the initial bite targeted his head and neck, delivering massive trauma that would have caused rapid loss of consciousness. Shailene exited her tent and attempted intervention, but the bear shifted its focus to her immediately. The adult son, recognizing predatory behavior from the bear's unwillingness to disengage, fled into the darkness rather than attempting a rescue that would have resulted in his own death. He ran for over 2 miles before stopping, remaining concealed in dense vegetation until first light. The journey to the nearest ranger station required an additional 12 hours of hiking, with the survivor reaching help at approximately 3 p.m. the following afternoon. The recovery team, accompanied by armed wildlife officers, reached the site 36 hours after the attack. The remote location and absence of human activity in the intervening period had allowed the grizzly to remain near the site undisturbed. The bear was found within 100 yards of the campsite, remaining near the site and returning intermittently to feed. Officers destroyed the animal before approaching the scene. Both victims had suffered catastrophic trauma, with forensic evidence confirming that the bear had fed intermittently through the night. The bite pattern and consumption areas were consistent with predatory attack behavior. Minimal evidence of prolonged defensive struggle was present on either victim, indicating the speed and ferocity of the initial assault had prevented meaningful resistance. Investigation concluded the attack was predatory in nature. The bear displayed unusually low fear of humans, though evidence of direct food conditioning was inconclusive. The camp's location within an active salmon corridor, combined with peak hyperphagia timing, had placed the family in extreme danger. Investigators noted that even experienced backcountry travelers could make fatal errors when evaluating seemingly peaceful wilderness locations. While Alaska's mountains had demonstrated nature's capacity for silent, methodical predation, the rural plains of Tanzania would close our examination with a reminder that Africa's opportunistic predators are equally dangerous when drought drives them across the threshold between wilderness and human worlds. It was November 3, 2013, and the Singida region of central Tanzania had endured its third consecutive year of below-average rainfall, transforming normally productive grazing land into a dust-blown expanse where livestock died and wildlife grew increasingly desperate. In the rural village of Mitindo, reports of hyena activity had increased steadily over recent months, with several families losing goats and one child suffering severe injuries during a nighttime encounter that had shocked the community into temporary vigilance. Baraka Msemwa, 41, worked as a herder, moving cattle between scattered grazing areas and selling milk when production allowed. His wife, Nima, 37, managed their household while their oldest son, Juma, 20, assisted with herding duties. The family occupied a traditional dwelling constructed of mud brick with a thatched roof, secured at night by a wooden door held closed with rope latch. The structure had protected the family adequately during normal times, but the escalating drought had pushed wildlife behavior beyond historical patterns. Spotted hyenas, normally wary of human confrontation, had grown increasingly bold. A clan of 8 to 10 individuals had been observed near the village on multiple occasions over the previous 2 weeks, their distinctive whooping calls echoing across the settlement after dark. Village elders had organized nighttime watches, but maintaining constant vigilance proved impossible across the dispersed homesteads. The Msemwa family's dwelling sat at the village edge, isolated by nearly 100 yards from the nearest occupied structure. Spotted hyenas are among Africa's most powerful predators, despite their reputation as mere scavengers. Adult hyenas weigh between 90 and 140 pounds, with females typically larger than males. Their bite force exceeds that of lions when adjusted for body size, with jaws capable of crushing bone and shearing through thick hide with remarkable efficiency. During severe droughts, when normal prey becomes scarce, hyenas demonstrate extraordinary boldness around human settlements, entering structures and attacking sleeping individuals who present vulnerable, accessible targets. Hyena clans operate with complex social hierarchies, though their attacks are opportunistic rather than coordinated in the military sense. Multiple individuals may enter a dwelling, but their behavior reflects independent opportunism, drawn by the same stimulus rather than planned cooperation. Hyenas prefer soft tissue and typically target the face and extremities first, with their bone-crushing jaws causing devastating injuries. Attacks unfold chaotically, with multiple animals feeding simultaneously, creating frenzied, brutal scenes. The attack began at approximately 4:45 a.m., during the pre-dawn darkness when both humans and most wildlife are at their least alert. Scratching and repeated pressure against the door suggested several minutes of attempts to force entry before the poorly secured barrier gave way. Investigators determined that several hyenas entered the dwelling, while others remained outside, drawn by the sounds of struggle that erupted immediately. Baraka was attacked first, his sleeping position nearest the entrance making him the most accessible target. The hyenas dragged him outside where additional clan members fed in the open space they preferred. The feeding focused on his face and soft tissue, with injuries consistent with the bone-crushing bite force characteristic of spotted hyenas. His screams alerted Nima, who attempted to pull him back through the doorway. She was attacked in the threshold, suffering catastrophic wounds as multiple animals bit simultaneously. Juma sustained severe lacerations while attempting to defend his parents, but the chaos and darkness made coordinated resistance impossible. His screams brought response from the neighboring homestead, where 4 men armed with farming implements and torches began running toward the Msemwa dwelling. The hyenas fled at the approach of multiple humans, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness after an attack that witnesses estimated had lasted 15 to 20 minutes. Baraka had died at the scene, his injuries incompatible with life. Nima succumbed to massive blood loss before medical help could arrive. Juma was transported to the regional clinic, but died en route from shock and blood loss. His injuries too severe to survive the 2-hour journey over rough roads. Wildlife authorities from the regional office arrived within 48 hours, documenting the scene and organizing a targeted operation to destroy clan members responsible for the attack. Over the following week, 5 hyenas were killed for public safety through coordinated hunting using bait stations and shooting platforms. Track size and pattern were consistent with individuals from the observed clan, including prints found inside and immediately outside the dwelling. The investigation concluded that extreme drought conditions had increased boldness and opportunistic behavior around human settlements, and that the family's isolated location combined with inadequate door security had enabled entry. The surviving victims from neighboring homesteads reported that hyena activity in the immediate area decreased dramatically following the destruction operation, suggesting the removed animals had been the primary aggressors. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.